Welcome to Fuse, the global podcast from the PRCA, where we explore the evolving landscape of global communications. We bring together leaders from public relations, politics, business, academia, and the media to spark new ideas and ignite innovation. Hello, my name's Dan Gold, and on today's episode we will have a fascinating conversation with Iain Anderson. Iain is a founding shareholder and executive chairman of H Advisors Cicero. He has over 30 years' experience as a political advisor, business journalist, and CEO and board-level counsel for some of the world's leading businesses and non-for-profit organizations. His clients have included Barclays, Unum, BlackRock, Royal Mail, General Electric, and many more. The Oversight Board, Legal and General, and American Express. Iain believes passionately in workplace opportunity and was appointed as the UK's first ever LGBTQ Business Champion by the UK government in 2021. He is a former chair of Stonewall, the LGBT charity. He chairs the Development Committee of Robert Gordon's College and is one of the Financial Times Global 100 LGBTQ Executives and one of the Financial Times Allies of Women in Business. Iain is a former chairman of the Association of Professional Political Consultants and the CIPR Public Affairs Group, and he's a fellow of the CIPR and the PRCA and is a freeman of the City of London. He was ranked in 2021 as the number one lobbyist in the UK in the PR Week Power Book, and City AM also includes him in the list of the city's most influential financial PRs voted by business editors. Iain, so many achievements and such a journey. Thank you so much for joining us here on Fuse.
It's good to be with you.
So, on a day-to-day basis, could you tell me what's a typical day in your work life, Iain?
Well, there isn't one. That's the easy answer. The more complicated answer is, I think, like lots of people that work in this sector, you can plan your world to an extent, but events get in the way. Right, lots of events get in the way. But usually the day is filled with properly giving myself a sense of what's coming today. In fact, I try to give myself a sense of what's coming today, the day before today. So the last thing I do before I go to bed is check #tomorrow's papers today. I really want to know what's kind of coming next. And then, it's going to be a mix of meetings with clients, meeting prospective organizations that you might be keen to work with. They might be keen to work with you, checking in on the political drumbeat, checking in on the news drumbeat. And then, maybe later in the day, there's an event to either attend, these days either online or in person, the way the world has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. So no day is the same. It's the reason I love the job.
So how did your journey evolve from when you were studying and that moment popped into your mind, which was, this is what I want to do? Or was it a case of an incremental journey from one thing to the next as you discovered more about your interests or more about the world, the political world, the social world?
So I was very fortunate. Some people are. When I was 16, I saw a movie, All the President's Men. The movie with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman about the fall of a presidency. And when I saw that movie, it was like 2 years before I went away from home for the first time to go to university, to go and study. I want to be around politics. I want to be around news. I want to be around journalism. When I went to study, I went to study politics, economics, and actually management too. And that's what sparked the interest. And look, I didn't come from a family that did any of those things. So I kind of had to make my own way in that sense. As again, as I think as many people do that find themselves in this industry. But no, that was the spark. And actually, any time in life where I think, well, yeah, am I absolutely doing the right thing? Should I be doing something completely different? I watch that movie again, and that gives me a further spark, if you like.
I've heard from many people who have that thing that is their icon, that is that inspiration. And sometimes when the path changes, or there's challenges, or there's a need to recenter up after, we all have those days of what am I doing? Being able to refer back to that reason why, that original inspiration, either allows you to recenter back to, okay, this is why I'm doing this, or it presents that opportunity of, have I moved from this point to another, and what is that journey? I'm intrigued in that piece itself, because for so many people that I speak to, the way that they describe what they do to friends and family can be challenging. What is it you actually do is normally the question. Well, it's this whole rainbow of things. It could literally be anything. No, but what do you actually do? So I challenge you here, Iain. What is the thing that you would say to an aunt or a cousin to be the thing that you do?
So I had to write a book on this a few years ago in order to try and unpack that. Book's still available on Amazon. But look, what you're trying to do, what you're aiming to do, is influence the national debate. And that might be news, that might be political decisions. And why are you trying to do that? You're trying to do that to support, in my case, usually businesses, to allow them to be able to scale up, to allow them to be able to invest, to have the confidence to invest. So, yeah, I mean, I use a phrase quite often about, if you cut me in half, which is a rather unpleasant idea, but you basically say that Iain enjoys being part of the current and being part of the debate. And that's the job. It's to influence that debate and to do so for those that you work with.
So, as I understand it, you did a traditional transition, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but your transition was you started in the journalism side and then moved across to the public affairs side. How did you first get your first step in the door with journalism? And at what point did you feel that transition was timed, or it was time to do it?
So I'd written for the student newspaper, influenced by seeing that movie that we talked about earlier when I was 16. And when I left university, I the very first job I did was to go and work for a local newspaper in Scotland, a paper called the Courier. Why did I end up there? Well, I ended up there because in the last couple of years while I was at university, I'd helped them create a schools debating competition. You'll see some themes going on here in my life, right? And that debating competition was particularly focused on helping younger school children hone their arguments, take their arguments into the public domain, and kind of I had a bit of a glide path in a way in that we'd built that competition, and the courier said, "Well, do you want a job? Do you want a job?" Partly running that competition. That's what I did for a while, and then, actually, I was sitting in a news organization, so I ended up being a journalist. I loved it, and then had a career in journalism for about a decade after that with. Um, a number of business papers, was part of the setup, the launch of a publication that became part of the incisive media stable, very, very successful stable. And that allowed me, I got a chance alongside that to invest in size of media. And that created the opportunity in the end for me to be able to launch my own business. Why did I make the transition? Well, I kind of got to the point where I kind of wanted to see what it was like from the perspective of um, doing it myself, not writing about it. My father had been in business, and maybe I was influenced by that. So I always knew I wanted to see things from the business end of the telescope. Always knew I probably wanted to start my own business. And also, too, I think I sort of got to the point where at that particular moment in my life, I felt I'd written about every story I could possibly write about business and the business cycle. I got a bit bored of being a journalist, is the honest answer. And I wanted to make a kind of positive career choice to go into the comms sector.
So when I was younger, my father said to me, "Work for yourself. You'll be able to make these decisions, and you'll be the ultimately accountable person to your destiny and your direction. And there will be knocks, there will be moments of success, and it's riding it and just being consistent in what you do. Or you've got the path of safety. Go and work for someone who's established. Go and work for a corporation. But will you really ever be happy?" Which was what he seeded me with. Now, I didn't feel pressure one way or the other, because he put the options in front of me, and I saw how he had toiled but set his own direction. For you, that moment, the establishment of Cicero back then, at that moment, there might be people listening to this right now who may be working for, an organization currently, and they're thinking of making those initial steps to go their own way. Yet it's quite common that you'll go and say, "Hey, well, I'll go and do this because I've got the experience with these clients or whatever, and maybe I'll take someone with me, or maybe I won't." From your perspective, you came into this and with no client book, but good relationships from the media side, I'm guessing. How did you, on day one, put up the sign, open the door, and go, "Okay, there's my phone number"? How did you really build on the relationships that you had to get that forwards into Cicero?
So I had a bit of a period of transition. So I went from being a journalist to working with a big American-owned communications business. I kind of did that for about 2 or 3 years, and I wanted to, in a way, learn the ropes. So I wasn't sort of starting before we launched Cicero from the position of not having seen the kind of comms world. I knew there was a lot to learn, and there certainly was, but I also knew the sort of entrepreneurial bug was absolutely inside me. So look, I mean, when you launch on day one, you're launching with experience that you've had. You're launching with an idea, and our idea was really simple. It's the reason why we called the business Cicero, is that I think that there's far too much comms, or there used to be, at least in that era over 20 years ago, which I would say was push receive. And in a digital world, it really wasn't a digital world then, but most of the journey of Cicero, this has been a digital world. The idea that we had was that communications was a two-way street. That actually, what you really want to try and do is establish the best conversation that you can have. And a conversation is just that. It's not push receive. It's about both sides listening to each other and establishing potential for common action. And it was hard. It was the first 3 years of the business. There wasn't very much else in my life other than the business, and I think for anybody that launches a business, that if you want to make it really successful, that's got to be true. You've got to put your absolute heart and soul into that endeavor, because that 3-year rule is absolutely right. My father said this to me. He said, look, if you can make it in the first 3 years, you've got a good chance of having a great business. My goodness, he was right. Year one, the people that said that they would back you, back you. Year two, you've got to turn the gas up a bit. And year two was really hard. We'd actually launched, and 9/11, the Twin Towers fell within months of launching the business. The whole world changed. And we've seen many other moments that have made the whole world change as we've launched the business. So there's never a great moment. There's never a right moment to launch a business in terms of the wider external environment. It's got to be the right moment for you and whether or not you've got a great idea.
The world has been through so many changes, and as you identified there, the impact of 9/11 on all industries, how they interact with each other and how they listen to each other was certainly, it was a massive moment of change. Talking of change itself, from when you launched Cicero to how the industry stands now with this democratization of digital and just the enormous, opportunity to spread message, but there being so much noise. How do you see differences in practice then to now?
Oh, it's vastly different. Then the industry could get away with push receive. There was no debate, and the digital world has meant that people are writing about the fact that you've met them, or tweeting about it, Xing about it, or whatever you want to call it these days, before you've even got back to the office, right? So the world is more porous. The world is, to some extent, more transparent, right? And in many ways, that's a good thing. But the world is more obsessed and 24/7 about news and comms than it has ever been. And that presents a huge challenge for any organization. There's no hiding place. There really is no hiding place anymore. And again, in many ways, that's good. In many ways, organizations are being held to account. But what it does mean is that there's less time to think. And you do completely see people making and rushing to judgment calls, when a few years ago they would have had more time to just think through all the implications of some of those judgment calls. So it is very different. As I say, there's benefits in that difference, but to some extent too, there's also kind of danger in that too.
So many changes, definitely challenges and opportunities out there. Is there a particular campaign that you can think of, or a project indeed, that illustrates the power of strategic communication in driving business outcomes, particularly looking at that public affairs lobbying space?
So I mean, business has got a lot more sensible about the need to have ongoing relationships with public policymakers. So, I mean, the sector that I know best is the financial services sector, although kind of work a lot with the tech sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and basically any highly regulated sector. But the banking sector in particular, you're going to go back 15 years, the financial crisis in 08 and 09. Um, one of the reasons that we had the global financial crisis is that both financial institutions and politicians, they said that they talked to each other, but I think they were talking at each other, right? And now, and particularly having gone through the experience of the last 3 or 4 years, where actually I think the financial services sector has earned itself a lot of credit back in the tank in terms of the way in which it dealt with and gave people forbearance and support through the pandemic, supporting an awful lot of businesses and an awful lot of individuals through that period. I think for me, that is a really interesting case study of, 15 years ago, finance and policymakers were at each other's throats and fingers were being pointed at each other. More lately, it's been a much more collaborative relationship. And I think for me, it's a really powerful case study, not least because I've been around some of those issues, of why an ongoing dialogue, as opposed to what I would call pop up engagement, has served parts, not all, but parts of the financial services sector quite well lately.
I certainly look at it and noted, just as, a consumer and someone who keenly observes communications, marketing, PR, public affairs. I saw there was a dramatic change, especially when it came to the sense of how media and how regulators were perceiving, lending institutions and other organizations as to their behavior and the way that they took care of people versus what had gone before, and also government policy, how they'd really, really started to listen to people, and they were really concerned about the perception of the organization and whether there was a cruelty to it. Do you think that there's a change in mindset around, and maybe it's an emotive word to use, cruelty per se, but at the end of the day, in normal times, when the bank runs dry, the bank runs dry, and that's it. But in times of need, there's more leeway that has come into this. And do you think that perception piece is more and more important in the reputation of organizations?
Well, it's no surprise that it's heavily regulated parts of the economy, in Western markets at least, that have got more serious about public policy engagement. Why? Because of voter and political, and then regulatory pressure to do so. So look, I'd love to believe everybody's come at this willingly. That's not true. A lot of people, a lot of organizations have been forced to get more engaged. But actually, I think that as the governance of a lot of these organizations has changed, the kind of people who are sat around the top tables making decisions for finance and pharmaceutical and tech companies, and as there's more public scrutiny, more political scrutiny, more regulatory scrutiny, the kind of people that they've been recruiting in order to devise strategy are people that 15 years on are much, much, much more engaged in these conversations themselves, right? So that's good. There'll be another shock. In some ways, in terms of the debate around online harms and digital safety in the tech sector, the sector is going through an ongoing shock. And we're as a society kind of living through some of that too. And therefore the kind of dialogue, the ongoing need for dialogue that clients now have uh, creates this industry, and I think powers this industry ahead.
That's a really powerful statement. I would love to see many organizations move beyond what's on a CSR statement and really bring meaningful change into their practice. That would be lovely. And I think everyone listening to this, and you and I are both old enough to realize there are those moments where pieces that go onto a statement for an organization done by a well-meaning team are one thing, but a leadership may not necessarily embrace it, and they may at times see it as a hindrance. From a public affairs perspective, from the point of view of how they will move the needle with other organizations and decision makers, how can we really bring to the fore the importance of actually not just leaving these statements on paper or on a website, but actually bringing them into day-to-day practice to really show an organization as being the best that they can to decision makers?
Well, one word, and that's investors. Whether or not you or I want to do it, or anybody in the comms industry wants to do it, the thing that completely moves the dial is what investors are now asking, right? And investors are asking completely different questions of companies now compared to what they were asking 15, 20 years ago. Now, some of that's been wrapped around what one might, in very simple terms, call the ESG debate. And the kind of questions that pension fund holders are now asking about where their money is being invested, right? Those questions are fundamentally different to the questions that were being asked 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And that's what's locking in change. We can have an entire debate about where ESG sits or whether or not the terminology is right, but the reality is new cohorts of new generations of people saving money for the future or just buying stuff in a retail sense are asking entirely different questions, the kind of questions you and I might have asked or our parents might have asked. And that is what's locking in fundamental changes in terms of corporate behavior. And therefore, the CSR part of this is, it's just not even good enough anymore. It needs to go way beyond that. And people, I think, are still working through what communications looks like around all that.
Now, you've been recognized as one of the Financial Times Global 100 LGBTQ Executives. How do you integrate advocacy for LGBTQ plus rights into your work in PR and communications?
So, this is something that, maybe some folks may share over, again, a similar sort of generation. I mean, I was not out at work when I started work. I wasn't really out at work when I launched my um, own business. I look back on that now as the business has grown and we've turned it into a global company. I look back on that now and say, well, what were the barriers? What was stopping you? The barriers then were quite, I think, easy to define in my head, that you were worried about what people might think and do. You were worried about how people might react to you. And therefore, lately, in the past, particularly sort of 10 years of my life, I've really lent into this because I do want the people that I work with, whether or not there's people who work directly with me or clients, not to have any barriers, to have real opportunities. And to your question about how I integrate it, I am I'm entirely myself. Yeah. This idea that there's nothing compartmentalized. that what you see is what you get, and that hopefully there's an opportunity to lift up folks at the same time. So that's the reason why I'm quite passionate about this. And I'm passionate about this not just in the LGBTQ plus. I'm passionate about this really in terms of social mobility. Yeah, I didn't really, if I, as a 16, 17, 18 year old looking at myself and what's happened in my life since, I would have hoped that there would have been no barriers. There were barriers to jump through, and I'm quite keen that that sense of opportunity is there for everybody. So I try and bring that whole idea into virtually everything I do.
As someone who came out last year myself, it was the most difficult thing that I've ever done, but thankfully surrounded by incredible people, incredibly loving people, and colleagues who were like, yeah, like we didn't know. It's like the only person who really didn't bring out that identity was actually me. And it's been totally liberating. And if there was something only from my very fresh experience that I would say to anyone else is it's not for anyone else to make the decision for you. You'll find your path at your time. And look, it took me 46 years to get to that point. But at the same time, know that there are people to look to see that this is a journey that many, many, many people have been on in finding that identity and finding that strength. So I encourage anyone to find their path and not be ashamed of who they are, because that's the thing that was probably the part of my journey for so long. It's like having to hide this, having to, not talk about things and not bring that to my professional practice made such it meant that there was probably about 30% of anything that I wanted to write or do just wasn't there. And that for me was a shame, because I think there are projects that I can look back to and conversations I certainly could have had where the truth would have been better for how I felt around what I was doing at that time, and not having to, wear a veil. And I could have brought more of me to it. But again, individual decisions, individuals' journeys.
That's right. And look, congratulations to you. Because when I look back on when I wasn't out, certainly at work, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. We're all human beings, and not to be able to be yourself is you're thinking about every word, you're thinking about every reaction, you're thinking about how to be, and not having to do any of that stuff and just actually thinking about being great at work, it does make your life an awful lot easier. But it's not, we're sitting talking to each other in two kind of Western countries. We've got to be absolutely honest. There'll be people that I hope get the opportunity to listen into this around the world, and in some parts of the world, you can't be yourself. And some very, very forward-looking organizations are trying to create safe spaces in territories where it's actually, it remains illegal. I mean, you can be thrown off a building for being you and me. And nobody will bat an eyelid, and nobody will be prosecuted, right? So, there's still an awful lot to do here. There are still, many countries, tens of countries around the world where it's illegal to be yourself. And there's still a really, really, really big journey to go on. And we've got to keep going on that journey.
As we get towards the end of our time today, one of the things I'm really intrigued about is, political seasons change. Sometimes political drives to the left, sometimes to the right, sometimes it's somewhere in the middle and there's fringe voices. But just looking particularly at, diversity, and whether that's gender or sexual or all the other elements that bring us this beautiful society. Is there a challenge when it comes to lobbying, particularly, or public affairs, when we look at parts of Europe that have moved quite significantly to the right, and the approach that you have to take with that new administration that comes in?
Yeah, look, I mean, I talked to some organizations, and if you talk to a lot of folks that lobby in Washington right now, they say there's a very clear divide. You can talk to one party about values and social progress, and you can talk to another party only about value, only about economic value, and they're not interested. In fact, will positively reject and push back on the idea of um, diversity, in the sense that they'll call it woke, right? I mean, I'm not woke. I'm just me. But that makes the challenge of the conversation, I think, even harder right now, because often it's not a conversation; it's a shouting match on social media. Nuance and complexity are lost, and I talk to some that will say that there's an entirely different briefing and script for the conversation with the blue team versus the conversation with the red team. We've got to try and get beyond this culture war stuff. I hope we can. I think the economics of the world right now and squeezed incomes, I mean, that's fundamentally for me why we've got a culture war. When boats are rising, people are happier, people don't point fingers. When incomes are more squeezed, people look for fingers to point, and that's the essential problem right now. And I just hope we've got to keep on going at this, that some tension can be taken out of some of these dialogues right now, because they're not dialogues; they're people sort of screaming at each other.
Iain, thank you so much for joining us here today on Fuse. I'd love to catch up with you again. I've got so many questions relating to that nexus, that space, that crossover between public affairs and public relations, and how some PR organizations may not be taking advantage of getting support from the public affairs space, and there may be opportunities for them to benefit from that. Before you go, where can people find out more information about you and your organization?
So the best place to go and have a look is cicero-group.com.
Iain, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to you for taking the time to listen or watch this episode of Fuse. If you want more information about each of our episodes, you can go to prca.org.uk/Fuse, or find our latest video episodes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.